Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to LTL Media. We're here on Let's Talk Live, and it's very nice to be back in the studio. I've been out of the studio for, I don't know, almost close to 2 weeks. They're installing an AC system in here over the weekend, and then by Monday, I'm hearing that we're going to have AC. It's just been brutally hot in here, over like 90 degrees in the building during the day, and I'm all the way up on the top floor. So it hasn't been the best environment to live. That's why I've been doing them from the bedroom. But anyway, welcome in, everybody. We're going to have a fantastic show today. I have attorney Melanie Little back on the channel. It's nice to have her over here. And we're going to have Jess Machado from the Fall River Reporter as well. And I won't wait too much longer here. I just want to do this before we kick off tonight, just to let everybody know. Any donations that come into tonight, Super Chat, Cash App, Venmo, 25% of it will get kicked back to Karen Reed. So if one of my moderators, Rogue's been great at doing it, if you can just keep a total on the throughout the show, then we'll get a ultimate total at the end, and then I will be transparent at the end of the stream, like I always am. I post receipts up on my YouTube community page and my Facebook LTL Media group. So you can go over there, see the receipts on that page, and then ultimately go right to the defense website, and it will say LTL Media, chat raiser, and then whatever today's date is, 5/30/24. So welcome in, everybody. I won't wait too much longer. Let's bring in the ladies. We have Melanie Little. How are you?
Hello.
And Jess Machado, Fall River Reporter. How are you?
Hi, everybody.
Hi, Jess.
Nice to see you and welcome back. It's been a little while to see everybody, and here we are. We're what now? 4 weeks, 4.5 weeks into the Karen Reed trial. The Commonwealth is literally slumbering everybody to sleep. And
18 days. 18
yeah,
days.
and the witnesses that they have brought up have really benefited the defense, in my opinion. But it's nice to have everybody here. And we wanted to have Jess on, and I thought it was a great opportunity to have Melanie here as well to ask some questions of like what's going on in the courtroom. So Jess, I know that you were there. You said on the second day of Higgins' testimony, and then you were there when the niece and nephew, John O'Keefe's niece and nephew also testified. Give us a little bit of the vibe of like what's going on inside the courtroom.
Yeah, so on that day, we never know who is going to be on the witness list. Obviously, if it's a witness carried over from the day before, we know. But the day of is really when you know who's going to be there. And I was actually in the ladies' room downstairs. I ran into Karen Reed's mom, and she was the one that tipped me off and told me that John's niece and nephew were going to be testifying that day. So the anticipation was there. As soon as they were getting ready to be called, we thought as media, we were going to be able to do our usual live tweeting. We obviously knew that there was going to be no video going on, but we actually thought there was going to be audio. And so the cameramen had been already saying they were going to just, do the screen, the fan, right? And you'd have the audio going. So it was very quick where we learned there would be no audio, there would be no video, and that we weren't actually allowed to use any of our electronics. Our laptops had to be closed. Our phones had to be off. We couldn't touch them. Wow. So that was a real twist, and I'm not sure anybody was prepared for that. And prior to, they pulled out the order because we had been given an order of what the media needed to respond to with these minors. I interpreted it a little differently. I thought that we actually could live tweet from the room. Obviously, we weren't taking video anyway, or doing audio. So there was a little pushback from a couple of members in the press box. They interpreted it the same way I did, but at the end of the day, we weren't going to ruffle any feathers. So we did exactly what they said. We closed our laptops, and they ended up coming around and giving us notebooks and pens and said, you can write old-fashioned way and take notes. And then when we went to our break, they told us that we'd be able to live tweet or report on it, but while it was happening, we could not. So it threw everybody, I think, for a little bit of a loop. But we adapted really well. And then they brought in John's nephew. He was actually on the stand prior to the jury coming back into the room. So the jury left for the break, and the nephew came in and went right to the stand. What's the name of the person who works for the Commonwealth with Lally? Is it McLaughlin? What's her name?
McLaughlin, yeah.
So she was up there with the nephew speaking to him, as was Paul O'Keefe. So while we were waiting for everything to kind of get together, they were with him. Paul O'Keefe, I believe, his two daughters, and I don't know how many children he has, and I'm sure your followers will know for sure. But what we thought was two of his children actually came into the courtroom and sat with him and his wife. And then when the niece came in later on, it looked like a friend or perhaps a cousin, but a teenage girl was also added and brought in. So there were like aged children sitting with the O'Keefe family while both children testified.
Wow. That's a good idea for moral support. I mean, it's so traumatic, you know, for these kids to have to get up there in the first place in front of a packed, hot courtroom full of strangers, except for maybe their grandmother, right, and their aunt and uncle. And so I like that they did that. I think that that was a good thing for the children, because a lot of us don't feel that the children should have been forced to do this, but.
Yeah, and they're close and very close proximity to the jury. So as you know, or maybe you can't tell, but it's literally feet, less than 5 feet from the first juror to the box where
really
it is. It's very, very close. And those jurors have a tendency to be very attentive. So, I mean, just think about 5 feet from you or less, how close you are to someone. And that is a stranger. That is someone that you understand is there to make judgment on all of the facts in this case. So that can be intimidating as well. And then, of course, Karen was there, and both children had to identify Karen. The prosecution asked if they, knew who Karen Reed was, and can you identify that person, just like they do with regular witnesses. And both children had to do that.
How far? And I think you told me this last time, Jess. How far is Karen from actually the jury itself?
I mean, I would say a little, maybe 10 to 15 feet. Wow. It's a very, very small room. I would say it's half the size of the other courtroom that we were originally in prior to the change with the not having the public allowed. It's also configured oddly. It's a square shaped room, but everything is actually on an angle. So Judge Canone is in the corner, and everything is kind of off that way. It's very intimate. And I explain this. Karen Reed's family is like this to John O'Keefe's family. So they're in eyesight of each other. And as in the other courtroom, they would have been side by side, and they would have never been able to make eye contact unless they leaned over and looked across. So it creates, I think, a very intimate environment. And again, Karen is, very close. It's almost as if you could touch her. She's right there. The jury is probably what I feel is a little isolated. But when the prosecution or the defense is speaking and they're behind their podium, they're the same distance, maybe a couple of feet from the closest juror.
Could we do something about getting the attorney at the podium a mic? Because we have such a hard time at home. Here, I'm sure you can hear it fine when you're sitting there and they're 5 feet away. At home, we can never hear the attorney. The witness is fine talking into the mic, but there's no mic at the podium. So maybe you could work on that for us, because it is so hard. You can't modulate the sound when you're streaming it live, because turn up one volume. It's a mess. So
it actually isn't. It's not clear when we're in there. It is a struggle. And I know prior to the show, we were talking about the temperature in the room. They've added fans, and there's a fan located behind the jury where the pool camera is. And one of the witnesses, when we were in court this week, was not speaking loud enough, one of the physicians. And, Judge Bev had to say multiple times, I need you to speak up. I need you to be louder. And if you don't, we're going to have to shut off the fans. And then if we shut off the fans, it's going to start getting warmer in here. And indeed, she ultimately said, we have to shut it off. So they did. And it was easier for us to hear. But it is, Lally, unfortunately, is not very projecting when it comes to his voice. He loses stamina, I find, very quickly, and he trails off often. And I think that sometimes the witnesses also pick up that vibe from him. So I find if the defense is out there, they're more energetic. They're very rarely behind the podium, actually. Jackson is often in front of it, walking towards, interacting, very handsy with his hands and moving around, very rarely touching the podium, where Lally very rarely leaves it. He is usually very close to it. He's leaning on it. And it's a different energy level for sure. So, we struggle to hear him sometimes. And I think it rubs off on the person testifying, unfortunately.
How's the jury playing off? And I think we talked about this last time, the different energies. You have Lally, you just said that he's kind of lulling everybody to sleep, in other words. And then you have Jackson or Yannetti that's very animated. Are they watching are they watching the attorneys, or are they kind of keeping focus on Karen? Or they kind of, I heard at some point she said they kind of playing this tennis match sometimes. They may watch Jackson and go to the witness, Jackson the witness.
I would say that the witness is what's provoking the reactions, if any, from the jurors, more so than the prosecution or the defense. You know, I have taken kind of identifying which jurors are paying attention. I've understand their mannerisms. You know, in the beginning, I recognized a juror that's never really looking down at the witness as maybe being disconnected. I've maybe changed that a little bit. I think he is really, but it's just his way. You know, I think that this is a group of personalities and everybody is different. Wow. Also, these individuals don't know whether or not they're a juror or the alternate. So everybody is paying attention with the same enthusiasm. I would venture to say Karen should be very lucky. This does seem like a very attentive jury. We're on our 5th week. Sometimes it's very arduous testimony. And I do feel that for the most part, they are connected and they are paying attention. There are people that I think are easier to watch that have more reactions than others. They're the women. It's the women. The facial expressions are there more for women than they are for men. Although there is a guy in the back, when he occasionally raises his eyebrow, it's very easy to see because he's got his eyebrow raised. When the children were testifying, I felt all of the jurors' faces were softened and not as regimented, maybe per se. You could tell that some of the women seemed to be sympathetic. There was some head nodding going on. There was some maternal, I think, feelings that you could see some of these women were feeling towards these kids. And then, as you know, the defense, you know, and I don't know actually if you know, but the defense did say to the first child, the minor boy, at the end, after asking him just a few questions, he said, "I'm so sorry you were asked to be here." And I think a lot of people felt that way. You know, the Commonwealth did not have to call them. And I was going to ask Attorney Little that, and I know it's not me to ask the questions, but what's your take on even calling the minors in?
Open
Brian,
conversation.
just hold on a second, Brian. I got a question.
Yeah, no.
Yeah,
and I feel really strongly about this because for my entire career, I represented victims and survivors of all kinds of things, you know, and children and adults who had suffered trauma as children. And so I know firsthand how traumatic it can be for children to be brought into court, to have to face someone that they loved, right? Who, by all accounts that we've heard from even Paul and Erin O'Keefe, was very, very generous to the children, who loved the children, who spent a lot of time with the children on vacations and school breaks. And she even stayed with them during the pandemic and homeschooled them while they were home and John was working. For them to have to get up and face her and to be made to answer questions about things she may or may not have done wrong without understanding the full ramifications of what they're testifying to, I find to be completely traumatic. Was it, and this is something they're going to have to live with, you know, God forbid she's convicted. They are going to think back and say, like, did I have something to do it? Was it because of me? You know, because so many child trauma survivors have a lot of guilt and a lot of shame about what happened to them, and not to in any way compare this to children who were, you know, SA'd or abused or whatever. But, you know, as the prosecution, you have to say, is it worth it? Is what these children are going to say going to make such a big difference in our case that we're willing to put them through this trauma? And, you know, in my eyes, and you can tell us what they testified to, but my understanding is they testified Karen did not have access to the ring footage. Is that right?
Correct.
So that did not help.
They actually testified it was offered and that she declined. Interesting.
That it was offered for her to look at the ring footage?
So I guess they asked whether or not they had access themselves. And the teenage girl said that it was offered and she declined. And then they asked if Karen had access, and she said, I believe she was also offered and she declined. So for John to have given access to Karen, I believe she testified it was offered and she declined.
Yeah. So, I mean, what was so important about them having to come in and do this? You know, that from their perspective of how old were they when this happened? 14 and
11,
11,
10. Yeah.
To come in and testify about arguments that they overheard. I mean, you know, it's a child's perspective. You know, if you ask children of any parents, you know, do your parents fight a lot? You know, their opinion of fighting a lot might be far different than an adult's opinion of fighting a lot. So was the payoff worth it for the Commonwealth? And I don't know. Maybe you can answer that because you heard what they had to say.
I mean,
and you
I
saw the jury's reaction to it.
Yeah, I anticipated that there must have been something they were bringing to the table that was going to sway the jury in some direction to have so much value where they would do this, right, and bring them in.
Yeah.
I never heard that. I actually thought what they did do is put on display what I think is a very typical co-parenting relationship with a step-parent style relationship. Karen, obviously not their biological mother, just dating John for only a couple of years. I'm a step parent. Nothing that they said was out of the ordinary of the regular realm of those feelings of, you know, this person is a caregiver, but what is their ability to parent? What do they set the rules? One of the things that the teenage daughter testified to is when they were on vacation, the fight that we have all heard about where John maybe had this interaction with someone in the lobby, right? We've heard about this argument and this fight that ensued, but we got insight into how that actually started. And as you know, they had 2 separate hotel rooms. The kids were in one room and Karen and John were in another. John went into the kids' room, and I guess he was kind of not disciplining, but telling the youngest child, the boy, to get off of his iPad. We're on vacation, get off your iPad, get off the electronics. And I guess it was Karen that came in and sort of defended him and said, you know, he's just a kid or something like that. And then the argument kind of parlayed from there. So I don't think we got that insight before of how this really started. And also the teenage daughter did say that she felt that Karen was closer to the younger boy than she was to her. And that the relationship was better between the 2 of them.
Wow.
That's so interesting because really the only other fight that we've heard about between John and Karen with regard to the children was that he took the niece to, that Karen took the niece to Dunkin' Donuts on the way to school on the morning of January 28th and bought her a nice coffee, and that John was maybe upset about that because he didn't want her to get used to it or didn't want them to be spoiled. And, you know, some other testimony that maybe Karen spent too much money on the kids with regard to buying them nice clothes and stuff. So,
well, I mean, I think we've painted a little bit of a picture of what it was like living with John O'Keefe as a parent and a father figure role. We know he liked to keep his house clean, no shoes in the house. We also learned in this testimony that he wanted their phones plugged in his room at night before they went to bed. So I'm just thinking about that as a parent, right? That's something that when my kids were little, I would do the same thing to protect them from being online, going online past the time that they're supposed to, but also it's giving him access to their phones, right? And the night of John's death, the teenage daughter had put her phone in John's room, even though John wasn't there. When she went to bed, she put her phone on his nightstand plugged in. So it just goes to show what kind of a parent he was, that he established rules. They followed him even when no one was looking. And it was in the morning when Karen went there and woke her up. She was telling her to call John. She said, I don't have my phone. It's in JJ's room.
Wow. Yeah, we never heard that before. That's new information, right?
Yeah. So she had to actually go and get her phone. Karen went and got her phone and brought it back to her so she could make that call. So you get a little bit of idea about, you know, John's parenting style. So again, with the Dunkin' Donuts argument, right? He didn't want them to have junk food or that for breakfast. He didn't want their shoes in the house. He wanted their phones by the side of their bed. And on the Florida trip, he didn't want him playing on his iPad. He wanted him to be more in the moment. And it seems like Karen was in a parenting role, a little bit more carefree and a little bit more fun, I guess.
The fun parent, right?
So that's when I start thinking about if there was arguing, which the children both testified to, that towards the end of their time together, which, and by the way, there was no end of a relationship. It was ended by John's death, that the fighting had accelerated and seemed to increase in frequency. It all just still sounded very normal. It didn't sound like anything extraordinary. DCF was never called. And by the way, the defense asked at the end, do you know what it means to raise your hand in anger? And the boy said, I do. And he asked, did you ever see John raise his hand in anger to Karen? And he said, no. And then, did you ever see Karen do the same? And he said, no. I mean, it just sounded a very typical and a parenting relationship and a family life under really tough circumstances. You lost 2 parents. You're being raised by your uncle. They've already been through so much trauma. regular co-parenting blended families are hard enough, let alone one with so much baggage. It just didn't seem out of the ordinary.
Yeah, I was just gonna say a couple of things. Going back to these kids having to relive this over and over again in their mind for 2 years, and then having to come into court. The psychological effect on that, and then they've lost John. On top of that as well too, and then just going to Jess's point. Nothing out of the ordinary that I've heard in any of the testimony, and just what you just said right now doesn't sound like any argument that would be out of the normal for a couple, or a couple that is parenting kids. Couples fight. It happens. You have disagreements with your partner. I mean, but that doesn't give you the motive to go. It doesn't mean that you're going to go kill them.
Right.
At least in my opinion. And again, everybody that has testified, I mean, even just going back to the first witnesses, Paul and Erin O'Keefe, they said they just had a normal relationship, and Karen was very nice. I mean, that was like, I thought they were going to get up on day one and these two witnesses are going to be like, she's awful and she was screaming all the time. And it wasn't the latter. It was just like, she's fine. She was great to the kids. And I'm like, this is not going to go well for the Commonwealth, in my opinion.
I feel like they're trying to paint this picture of Karen being really resentful towards the children and not getting enough time with John. And that was the whole problem in their relationship, which I think is, first of all, highly unfortunate for the children that they're going to have to read about this forever. But also because the witnesses that we've heard from, like Erin, who said, they had problems because, the children, like Karen had a different parenting style, and that's really what it was about. And then even Karina, right, Kolakithis, testified, Karen said to me, I just wish that John's family would step up a little bit more and help take care of the kids so we could have some alone time together. And that's normal in any relationship. Parents who raise children together, who are married and it's their biological children, also need time as a couple, and need help from babysitters or grandparents to help with the kids. And I just find this picture that they're trying to paint to be just, I don't know, a little disingenuous maybe.
No, I agree. I completely agree. Let me just get caught up on some of these chats real quick. Amy, thank you so much for becoming a new member.
Hi,
Susan,
Amy.
thank you for the gifted 5. I appreciate that. Audrey says, great lineup tonight, and hashtag free Karen Reed. Thank you so much. Grant's Pants says, great panel trio tonight. I love watching Melanie, Cameron Diaz during the day and reading alerts of Jessica's tweets. And then Charlene just chimed in, said, hi, what a fabulous panel tonight. The kids proved on the stand that Karen Reed had no access to the Ring camera. And then Cheryl with a 1999. Thank you so much. Jess, Melanie, love following you too. Thank you. I appreciate that. And again, 25% kickback will go back to Karen Reed tonight. I think we're at 135 total, and we'll get the total at the end of the show. So I know what I wanted to ask you, Jess. So when Brian Higgins, you're there on the second day of testimony, how is the jury reacting to that? I mean, we had just the prior day. Well, actually, no, that was the Friday. That was when at the very end, the fireworks came out. So we're waiting for these fireworks. Like, when is these fireworks going to happen with Higgins? And then all of a sudden, Alan Jackson gets up at like the last 15 minutes of court, comes out with, breaking all these potential federal laws. In my opinion, I think he did.
I think he admitted to it.
Yeah, essentially admitted to it. And then we had kind of those fireworks at the end where Lally literally stood up, and Alan Jackson's like, what are you doing? Why are you standing up?
Haven't said anything yet.
Right. And then we have court come back on Monday. How is the jury really reacting to Higgins when you were there?
So what I noticed is poignant moments in testimony get written down by almost all jurors. You have your standard note takers that some people are very attached to their notebooks. But as the judge described in the beginning, you don't want to be too dependent on those because you'll get caught up in writing and you're going to miss something. It happens to me. Sometimes I'm tweeting and I'm missing a valuable piece of testimony. And so I really try to discipline myself to kind of pause and listen or wait for a break. But you do have a couple of jurors who I've identified. They're 2 males, primarily at the end, which I consider the dead zone, which is the furthest away from every person that's a part of this, all the way in the corner, so to speak. So furthest away from Karen, furthest away from the judge, furthest away from the witness. Their note taker is down there, and they often write all the time. They also look through their notebooks. During Higgins' testimony, the part where I believe the defense asked, are you apprehensive about saying that you put these items in a trash bag? Once he finally extracted that from him, they all wrote almost at the same time. So I think they've been there long enough where they're recognizing what's valuable pieces of testimony, and then they're documenting it. So getting reads from the majority of these jurors, like facial expressions and things, it's not happening. I think you really have to watch their mannerisms. You know, so I'd love to ask Attorney Little this as well. There's one juror who I thought very early on seemed very well dressed. I call him Vineyard Vines, right? He dresses like he's out of a Vineyard Vines catalog. Very
Vinny Vines.
Bucket Vines. So it gives them all nicknames in my head, which is actually what, you know, people were not happy with. You know, me likening them to whether it's people from movies or things, to them, I guess, gives them too much of a description of the jurors. But, you know, Vineyard Vines seems almost like disconnected. And I was speaking with someone and I said, this guy seems like a reputable, decent guy, right? He's dressed well. He's well manicured with his hair, and he's very tall, and he's just astute in his seat, but he just does not seem to take notes. Like he's not paying attention. I said, he's not interested. And someone had suggested to me that he's heard already what he needs, and he knows what the answer is going to be. Do you think that is possible, that this juror has already just made up his mind?
Well, think about it from just people that are watching this trial, right, for the first time, that didn't know anything about the case, that are watching on my channel and Brian's channel and all of our channels. And they've heard enough. I mean, people who were new to this case have said to me, or in my chat or in comments, that, you know, wow, you know, I kind of heard about this case, but I really didn't have an opinion one way or another. And they're just still sitting there waiting for some evidence that Karen Reed hit John O'Keefe with her car. And I think, you know, if you're on the jury, you're kind of like, okay, like, how much more of my time, maybe, he's thinking, are you going to waste here? Because you haven't shown us one piece of evidence other than an alleged confession heard by somebody who never told anybody else to write it in a report, right? If you're talking Katie McLaughlin, the I hit him, I hit him, I hit him. And then all of a sudden, Jen McCabe on the stand says, I hit him, I hit him, I hit him. But she never told anybody that ever. That was the first time she ever said that was on the stand. So is it possible that they make up their mind? Sure. They're not supposed to. Right. They're supposed to wait until all the evidence is in, but yeah, maybe he's just done taking notes, or maybe he's just one of those people who doesn't need to, you know, because like you said, I know that when I'm covering the case live and I'm writing notes, sometimes I'll miss something too, and I'll have to rewind it and go back and listen to it again. So, you know, everybody comes into the jury. I like to say that jurors don't leave their common sense at the door. They come into a case to sit on a jury with all of their personal experiences and all of their life experiences and everything that they know and have learned throughout life. And they're not going to forget that when they walk in. And that's what you're getting when you get a jury. That's why jury selection is so important. So does it mean that he's not interested? No, but it may mean that he kind of feels like he knows where he's going, or he just wants to listen and he doesn't. Could you imagine if they did not switch courtrooms and some of those jurors were looking at the back of Jen McCabe's head, or at the back of Brian Albert's head, or Higgins' head? Because when we're watching it on TV, we're watching their facial expression. We're analyzing their facial expressions. We're watching for cues and things that may indicate they're not telling the truth. The lip licking, the twitching, the whatever's going on there. And could you imagine if the jurors were looking at the back of these witnesses' heads? Yeah. I mean, I don't know how those cases have been tried in that courtroom before, if that was really like their view of the witness, because it's so important to assess credibility, to be able to see someone's face, don't you think?
I was originally very upset about the change because I knew that it was going to not only limit the press, but it was going to limit the public participating. And I wasn't really sure, but having been in that courtroom and looking back on it, I agree with that. It was not going to be a clear view of the witness. I do understand that they've been holding cases in that room for 100 years. And, you know, just because it's always been done doesn't mean it should be done that way. And maybe this is a refreshing, you know, view of something that maybe needed to be reviewed anyway.
Mhm.
But yes, this is very different. And we all are very glued to, there is one juror in particular that I think I've mentioned to you, Brian, that there are a couple of witnesses where it doesn't matter whether the prosecution or the defense is asking questions. It doesn't matter if there's a pause. She always had her eyes on the witness, even in the downtime, watching. And I find that to be so fascinating that when you're not it's almost like watching the TV with the volume off and you want to be able to pick up on things that you didn't see. She has her eyes glued on some witnesses sometimes, no matter who's speaking. And I love that because I think she's really looking for those organic moments of catching them off guard, or, you know what I mean? And she's my favorite juror. I know I shouldn't have an attachment to any of them, but she's the one I always look to first. She has most reactions too. There's another woman in the back row that she's also, you know, you can see what she makes. She laughs a lot. She nods her head. But the one in the front, I call her juror number 4. I don't know what their numbers are, but I love how much attention she pays to.
Oh,
is Jess freezing, or is it me that's freezing?
Oh, there she is.
She's back.
She's back. Yeah, real quick.
So
you know,
I don't know.
It's okay. No, it's okay.
We're breaking the internet. Right.
I got a couple of chats I'm going to bring up too, but I just wanted to say, you know, I'm actually really happy about the venue change. I think the defense made a fabulous case of, you know, of showing, you know, when they showed Yannetti with those pictures of where the jury would be able to see. And I think in this case specifically, I think that it is only right that Karen Reed faces these witnesses so that jury can see the facial expressions back and forth. How are they looking at Karen? What is their body language to Karen? What is their body language when the defense is doing cross? I think that's ultimately so important for this jury to see, you know, how are they reacting and responding to these typical types of questions. And I'm actually happy for it. I think it was the right move, and you know, and we're seeing it. You know, we're seeing it now, and I think it's playing out really well in court. So,
or even more so, I would argue, how is the witness looking at Karen? So I was going to ask you, Jess, like when Higgins was testifying, was he looking right at Karen, or was he avoiding all eye contact with her?
Sometimes he was looking at her, but I can tell you, she never wavered from him.
I saw that.
She's ultimately confident and comfortable in that space, no matter who is there. I don't see her falter at all. She's a very hands-on client of the defense team. She is often talking back and forth to them. There are times where I can tell that they're depending on her to give them a piece of information that they're going to end up asking. You know, I've seen her actually somewhat be very like aggressive. I don't misinterpret aggressive, but you know, pointing it and saying this, this, and this.
Passing notes.
Kind of, she's very involved. But when, you know, she has not faltered with any witness there. When I've been there, I have seen her maintain composure. She rarely changes. And keep in mind, there have been some very emotional moments in that courtroom right at the very beginning on the first day when we saw dash cam footage. And you could hear the audio of Karen screaming out in front of 30 Fairview. That was a very emotionally charged moment. And less than, you know, 15 feet from her, you have John O'Keefe's mother, who is crying and sobbing. You have Paul O'Keefe's wife, who is actually leaning up over her seat so she can look at the screen. She still holds her composure. I just don't know if there's any moment that could break her in this trial, in this testimony. She looks ahead. She makes eye contact with them. Not in any intimidating way. She's not making any faces. You can tell, you guys have watched. She's very composed. And Higgins was making eye contact towards her direction. She was looking at him often. And she just maintains the composure the whole time.
If looks could kill, that's the way she was looking at him. Like, really? Is this really what you're doing here? Like,
right. And I have a question for Melanie after this. Just let me read some of these. So Toothy Hurts, I love her. I love this this name. It says, question for Attorney Little. Any chance the prosecution ends this case like the Scheffler case, lack of evidence, or the defense wins the appeal after the prosecution rests?
Okay, I'm just going to correct a little bit of terminology here. So Scotty Scheffler, who was arrested the other day, they just decided to not press charges. They just dropped all charges. There was no trial going on. We're way, way, way past that stage. But the time for that would have been, like right away after her arraignment, even before that, to not even bring a case at all. So it's like kind of like apples and oranges. Or the defense wins the appeal after the prosecution. So it's not really an appeal. So what happens is after the prosecution rests their case, the defense always, in every case, makes a motion for a directed verdict and says to the judge, listen, there's no way that a jury could find my client guilty with respect to the evidence that's already been put in. There's no way a reasonable jury could reach a guilty verdict, and we're asking you to dismiss the case right now. Directed verdict or a motion to dismiss, same end result, the case would be dismissed. It's rarely granted. But if we were to rest the case today, I personally, and you can argue with me in the chat, I'm sure maybe there's somebody out there who maybe has seen some evidence that Karen hit John with her car. I have not seen it yet. I'm still waiting for it. So it's typically not granted, but who knows how much for we're on day 18 and we've yet to hear what the case is against Karen Reed. And many days her name is not mentioned in the trial. So
great point.
It's confusing
Melanie,
to me.
I have a question. How often is it that a defendant is involved in picking the jury and being there every day for jury selection?
Always.
Do you see? Yeah. Okay. All right.
Especially in a case.
I don't know. They kind of made a big deal in the media about that
It is a
around
big
here.
deal.
I don't know.
Oh,
if
really?
You saw that? Yeah. They were like, oh, she's there every day for jury selection. I'm like, well, you would think that you would want to be, because that's the jury that, the peers that you're picking.
Your life is in their hands, right? I'd want to be involved. And I think as you have certain intuition about people, and if you're going to be there during the questioning, you can be like, yeah, I don't think that person likes me. Or yeah, I think that person, we have like something in common. Maybe they will listen to my case and wait until the end. And so I think that her participation in that process is invaluable and quite necessary.
I should add that on the very first day of jury selection, both the prosecution and the defense have to introduce themselves to the potential jurors. I think I counted that room held 100 people, right? Or close to 100 people.
Yeah.
So they all came in, they all sat down, the Commonwealth introduced themselves, the defense team introduced themselves. And I think it was Jackson who introduced Karen Reed to them. And he said, and this is our client, Karen Reed. And she stood up and she turned around and smiled and did one of these to everybody. And that was the very first day. Now, obviously, many of those people are gone, but the people that are in that room were introduced to her on that very day.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's what they do. It's important because, listen, this is it's not a really small county, but there's been so much hype around this case for so long that there are people in the pool who were bound to have heard a lot about it or who may know her personally or know players in the case. So, yeah.
Let me just get to this really quick. Dag Nabbit, thank you so much for the $49.99. Says absolutely fabulous lineup tonight. Happy to contribute. Hashtag, free Karen Reed.
Thank you.
Dina Jam, thank you for being a member and an awesome moderator. Always here. I appreciate it. Says such a great panel. Thank you. And thank you for the 10.99er. Amy in Boston says $5. And also thank you for being a member. I appreciate it. Says Melanie and Jessica, you two are amazing role models for the girls. Beautiful, strong, and smart, and you're okay too, Brian. Thank you. It's about the ladies tonight. That's why I wanted to have them on. It's all about showcasing the ladies tonight. So, but yeah, it's I don't know, and I think I go back to what just Melanie said. I mean, I've really watched this trial. I've tried to kind of play it down the middle. I know that we're all very pro Karen Reed here, but I'm trying to play this down the middle and look at it and say, what has the Commonwealth shown me? That has proved that Karen not only murdered John, but, second-degree murder. And then, I've been kind of waiting for these moments. And in a particular moment that I was waiting for was when Jennifer McCabe was testifying, and she gets up she's on the stand and she says, when we get back to John's house, we get out of the SUV and we go in the house. And that's when Karen pointed out that her taillight was cracked and showed us. So they show the video and they go into the house, and I'm kind of sitting there and the video is playing, And I'm going, all right, so are they coming back out? Is that the moment we're going to see? Like, we don't even see that conversation. It never happened.
I was
And
so
I'm like,
confused. I thought
yeah.
there was going to be another video. I kind of like glossed over. I'm like, okay, well, I guess that other video is going to be coming out soon. Like, I think everyone was so confused by that.
Yeah.
Jess, were you in court that day?
I was. I actually just continued to rewind it on my computer screen. I was watching a live stream on YouTube,
like,
and I just kept going back to see, did I miss it? Was I tweeting? Did I miss this? So yeah, never saw it, and was also equally as confused as everybody else. I never saw it.
The worst thing to come out of that day of testimony was that Karen didn't take her shoes off when she ran into the house. You know, that was the big smoking gun that day. Well,
I actually interpret that as, and I should mention, going back to the minors that were testifying, the minor child girl was asked how was the demeanor of Karen that morning, and she said she was, I think she used the word, listen, I'd have to check my trusty notebook that they gave me because I didn't get to tweet it, but I think she said she was frantic. And Jen McCabe was relaxed or calm. And I look at that as, you know, maybe on a regular day, Karen would remember the rules. Maybe on a regular day where she wasn't missing her boyfriend, she would remember to take off her shoes. But Jen didn't have those feelings. You know what I mean? I attributed her calmness outside 30 Fairview that morning, and her tone on 911, her tone on the video is calm, relaxed. And Karen seems very proportionate to what was going on around her.
And also that word frantic, is that the word that the niece used?
I literally would have to flip through my notes.
Okay. Well, I'm interested to know because
I couldn't tweet it.
That choice of word is important to me because that's a choice of word that we've heard other witnesses use. And if people are talking about the case a lot, like in the debriefing that the EMTs would do at the station, they said almost every single day since this case happened, you know, it shows me that that's a word that was used in discussion of this case. And so it's not typically a word, frantic, that she's 16, I think now, that a 16-year-old might choose. She might say she was rattled. She was freaking out, you know,
freaking out, right?
Freaking out, right? Yeah. But frantic would not typically be a choice of word. So, you know, that's interesting to me.
Another choice of word, if you're hinging on word choice, you might want to take note that when asked to describe the relationship that Karen and John had towards the end, that same child witness used the word toxic.
Oh, because that's a word that also
toxicity. It had toxicity, I think, is what she said.
How many witnesses have we heard during this trial say, "Oh, I wish I had. I wish I had seen the body. I wish he did come in the house. I wish this. I wish this." And it's almost like it sounds like they're reading from a script. I think we've heard it at least 3 times.
And the butt
wouldn't you have seen his body on the lawn? I wish I had. Did you see John O'Keefe come in the house? I wish he did.
Yeah.
I was trying to find in my notes. I don't see what she said exactly, but I thought it was frantic.
I think that she used. You might be right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And these 3 butt dials, you have 3 different people butt dial in the same case, in the same trial. I mean, I just statistically can't see how that would even happen. Like, that can't happen. Like, there's no way.
I think one of the again poignant moments in testimony with Jen McCabe is when the defense listed out each one of the phone calls that Jen McCabe made to John's phone, time stamped them, right? And then, you know, talked everybody through what it would take to literally butt dial this individual, that those never went to voicemail, and then set it up to say, this was you calling this phone. And I'll be honest with you, I was tweeting, missed that piece. And then I was looking later and I was going, gosh, did I miss that? He kind of tied that all together, but he did. And you know, like you said earlier, Melanie, they don't leave their common sense at the door when they walk in there. We all have phones. We all know the process of how to use them. It just does not come off as authentic or believable that you butt dialed someone. It just 7 times never went to voicemail. It just doesn't sound authentic, I think. And I hope the jurors see it that way.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, let me just get to this really quick. $5 super chat. Thank you so much, Suzanne. Thank you for being a channel member as well. It says Brian loves surrounding himself with beautiful, intelligent ladies. Love Jess's insights and Melanie's analysis. And yes, Brian, you are a great host. Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
He is a great host.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And a couple more that came in. Let's see. Brass says, how about the Canton IT guy saying that the disc Lally gave him? Yes, and I'm glad. And Melanie and I talked about this earlier. And we can talk about this now. Lally gave him was not that what he sent to the Mass State Police compared to other known issues with evidence in this case. If you want to talk a little bit about that, Melanie.
I mean, so for those of you who did not see that day of testimony, there were people thought those witnesses in the afternoon were very boring, but they were so, I cannot stress how important those witnesses were because none of them had any skin in this game. The guy who came in to talk about the extrapolation of the blood alcohol content, he doesn't even work for the crime lab at MSP anymore. He's like as detached from that as he possibly can. But so this guy who's in charge of the library footage came in and said, Lally shows him a disc and a CD, like a CD-ROM, I guess, and said, do you recognize this? And he looks at it, he goes, nope. No.
It's not mine.
He said, well, isn't this like the footage that you gave to, you know, the troopers when they asked for it? But what was interesting was that it was like, did he say that Gallagher requested the footage? Because Gallagher's with Canton PD. He's not at MSP. So I was confused by that. But anyway, he's like, no, I think he gave him a flash drive. He's like, I don't know what this is. And then, you know, Lally was flopping all over like, oh, what do I do? What do I do? And then, you know, judge came to the rescue and said like, you know, defense, do you have any objection to this coming in? And I think they, he burned him a CD, but he didn't recognize it. So how this is being authenticated and now it's on consent that the defense is like, all right, we're not going to object. We know what's on the disc. We've watched it. But he also got on cross, he got this Jutras, I think was his name, to say that he never watched the video. He just turned it over. They only requested video from midnight to 1 a.m. and 5 to 6 a.m. Why didn't they just request the whole entire night? Why didn't they just request between midnight and 6 a.m.? Because it may have shown Allie McCabe going by, may have shown some other people going by, right? It's motion activated. He said he never watched the footage and he never redacted any of the footage or trimmed the footage at all. So
and was also not asked to preserve it. And was not asked to preserve it either.
Yes. Wasn't asked to preserve it.
Jess, you were there for that, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
I would. I mean, I would definitely say that on the surface, it was a very taxing testimony after the minors. If anything, that they were a high, and then these guys came in and it was a low. I attribute that, unfortunately, to Lally. His line of questioning, his sound, the lack of energy. It really makes it hard to follow. I don't think I appreciated the testimony of those individuals, especially our DPW works guy, right? Until after the fact, because when you're in there, it's a lot.
It's hot. You must have been, were you hot?
So this is an issue. They have ACs. I think it's been okay and comfortable. When you step out, you realize, wow, it is cool in there, but you're in there for a long time. And I'm not complaining. I am so lucky to be in there when I am. I would never complain about it. Yeah. But I think everybody was very happy to have a couple of days off to get out of there. I did notice Karen Reed's family either purchased or brought in cushions for the seats. So they're pews and wooden benches. And when they come in every day, in the room behind it, one of the court officers goes in and brings it in just to kind of keep them more comfortable. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I know the judge was concerned about the heat. The day before there was heat, they went in the night before, she said, to make sure it was going to be cool and that the team was like really conscientious of keeping it cool. But listen, the doors are opening a lot. There's a lot of in and outs. It's an old building. There's one of those splits at the top, a big split, but then that wasn't doing the job. So they added these fans, but it does add to the noise. I wouldn't say everybody's uncomfortable, but man, I can't wait to get out of there at the end of the day and just kind of relax. I switch out of my heels and put on flats, and it's just, I'm sure Melanie. Yeah. Courtroom. It's a lot.
But again, that's like,
I wanted to mention, I'm really glad you mentioned this about the jurors feeling like the prosecution is wasting their time. I think I forget, and we all forget, these people have lives. They're out of their jobs. Yeah. They're away from their families, and it's a lot. And at what point do they hit something where they say, I've just had it. Like, let's just get this over with, So I'm glad you brought that up because I forget about that.
Well, and also the heat. Look, it's hard to pay attention to something when you're sweating to death and uncomfortable, right? Like, it's just hard to pay attention. Like, you just want to get out of there. So the heat is a big problem in my eyes, as far as the jurors wanting to be comfortable and try and pay attention if you're distracted by the temperature in the room. And then she blames the poor witness.
Yeah.
Okay, it's your fault. We're gonna have to turn off the fans now. And she was not happy. And I felt so bad for him. He was trying. The poor guy was a low talker. He was a low talker. Like, you can't blame him. He's not used to being in a courtroom every day and yelling. And then you've got this half-ass schedule where one day of court this week, and then next week we have 2 more days off. And like, they want to get back to their lives, and they need to get back to their lives and their jobs. I mean, what's the pay for jury duty in Massachusetts? $40 a day, maybe.
Yeah, it's not very
$17 a day.
Yeah, I think it's less than that. I think it's like 15.
It's just not fair. They need to like get a schedule and stick to it. I don't care if it's like Hamptons Cape weekend summer. Like, this is a woman's life is at stake here, and that needs to be taken a little bit more seriously with regard to the court schedule, in my opinion. And that's it. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk.
All right, let me get to some of these chats real quick. Vicky says, so nice to see the 3 of you. I love hearing your take on things. Do you guys notice that Brian Higgins used the words cut through both with the Sally Port and the military base, diminishing words? Yes, I did. Lindsay says, in my opinion, it's bizarre that Higgins said, I would have done something to make a difference. I would have done something to make a difference rather than I would have tried to save his life. That's kind of weird. I agree. Tooth chiming back in, $5 super chat says, how detrimental would it be for the prosecution if the CW doesn't call Proctor?
If they call him, they're screwed. If they don't call him, they're screwed. So basically they're screwed either way. And it would be highly irregular not to call the lead investigator.
He's the one that handled the most.
I think they're going to. I mean,
and the most evidence, and did the most interviewing in this case. What? Why wouldn't they call him? That's what you have to keep asking yourself. And now we're hearing that that the Commonwealth's not going to call him. I mean, you're hiding something. You're clearly hiding something.
Do you notice how all the witnesses are throwing him under the bus? I didn't tell him that. None of the statements were recorded, signed, initialed in any way. They're all going to blame Proctor. Now they're going to throw him under the bus. Like, he wrote that down, but I didn't tell him that.
And tell me that's not advice from their attorneys, Melanie.
And McCabe did that.
Of course it is.
Well, I think the defense has been really great with using the same language every time they say, so did they get it wrong? Did he get it wrong when he wrote this report? So it's almost like Pavlov's bell. Like, it goes off in your mind that when I hear that statement, we're dealing with yet another individual at grand jury testimony, another person who was interviewed, and the person reporting got it wrong. And I think it's just a really great style of the defense where they are using those same keywords so that in your mind, especially over all of these days of testimony, it's easy for you to, pick up on that and say, oh, there's yet another example of a report that didn't quite, accurately depict what somebody said, or, they didn't understand their grand test. I think it's really great of the defense, and it shows just how strong they are to identify those moments. So it's easy for them to retain.
And then maybe they'll pull it all together in closing and say, and jury, you heard all of these witnesses say that they got it wrong. Don't you get it wrong?
Right.
I love that.
Daniel G, just want to get through some of these really quick. DNG 499 says, can we talk about the dog and how the dog never barked or had to go to the bathroom? Yes, I agree. I mean, you had Jen McCabe run up the stairs and she goes, I don't know where the dog was. I mean, come on.
And then Brian and Nicole said the dog was in the bedroom with them.
Right. And the dog never barked and never alerted anybody. Yeah. Vixie says, new perspective on how it is distraction and why maybe would get justice for John and free Karen Reed. Great panel, guys. Thank you so much. We have a 199er coming in. Dumping on a base is illegal. Any base. Yes. Christina says, what is your take on the prosecution's fixation on the location of Brian Higgins' Jeep parked outside near the mailbox at 34 Fairview? I'm going to add to that. And Melanie and I talked about this earlier. We talked about, wasn't it interesting how Alan Jackson talked a lot about the angle of the plow? Was it parallel? Was it to the, to the curb? I thought that was very interesting. And I was kind of wondering on that point too.
I'm stumped. I'm stumped by that entire line of questioning. Or if it's just like, did Matt McCabe and Jen McCabe get it wrong? Was the plow really there? Was the plow really not there? Did Ryan Nagel get it wrong when he pulled up and said and Ricky said there was no Jeep there? Like, the more witnesses you call in a case like this, the more you're opening up room for reasonable doubt because everyone's going to have a different story. And now the jury's like, well, nothing's making sense. So which version are we going to believe?
Yeah, I was lost on the Jeep questioning as well. Just the very explicit detail about where it was. I couldn't follow it. And for someone that follows this whole case, I just really didn't know where they were going with it. And I always say, if I'm feeling that way, the jury must be feeling the same way.
Right. Because we know so much more from studying this case from the beginning. So
right. Yeah,
I'm really confused.
Emmy, thank you so much for the $10 super sticker. I appreciate it. Steve, thanks for the $2. Thank you. Lindsay says, I bet they'll try to call Dwayne or Yuri next. Possibly. Could be. Gretchen, thank you so much for the $20 super sticker. And Kathy says, what did the jury think of Jen McCabe? Good question.
I didn't see much reaction from them, to be honest with you. The juror that I talked about that kept her eyes focused on Chris Albert, she had her eyes fixed on Jen McCabe, despite, you know, whatever's going on over here with the prosecution or the defense asking questions. She had her eyes locked on her. I always remind myself it just takes one juror, right, to have that reasonable doubt. In my mind, Jen McCabe's testimony was so egregious and so far-fetched at so many different moments. Take your pick on what you could say was not believable. I also really liked that the defense was talking about the family and friend piece, right? They're not family. I did not, I hate to disappoint everybody. I didn't see much reaction from the jurors at all, other than everybody was very attentive.
As they should be. And that's a good thing.
Right. Love Heals says, what if there's no Proctor? What if he's just the phantom scapegoat to blame for the corruption? I don't know. I think the Commonwealth would have to put him up there. But obviously if they don't, I mean, for me right there, it's just like, yeah, there you go. There's the guy that is the master, you know, the guy that set up the master plan to cover all of this. And then just going back to Jen McCabe really quick, I thought this was very interesting when Alan Jackson showed the Celebrite extractions. He said, okay, 623, 624, 624. She goes, oh yeah, those all happened, but apparently the 227, she's going to stand on the 227 never happened. I'm like, they're showing you like black and white data. It's not going to lie.
You know, Celebrite's the gold standard in every criminal case. So if all of a sudden it's not going to be accurate in this case, you better open up the floodgates for all the defendants that have been convicted on Celebrite data. But on that note, let's go Rangers. I got a game to watch, so I'm going to leave you guys. Thank you so much for having me. Good night, everyone. See you soon.
Go subscribe to Attorney Melanie Little on YouTube, please.
Thank you.
All right, go Rangers.
Let's go Rangers.
Jess, I understand if you have to go too, it's not a problem. I know.
I do actually. I put off dinner with the family for an extra hour. I actually could do this forever. I love talking about it, and I love that you asked me to join. And I'm a big fan of Melanie, so it was a real honor for me to be on with her. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll have to do this again. We'll catch up in a couple weeks. Maybe the three of us can get back together.
Yes, sir.
Awesome.
Thanks, Jeff. Have a great rest of the show. Thank you. Right. I don't know how to leave, Brian.
I got you. All right. Good stuff. Good stuff. Thank you, Melanie. Thank you, Jess. I appreciate it. All right.